Hi, my name is Crystal. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Group Hug Solar. We make ridiculously good looking solar panels that are easy for anyone to use because we think renewable energy shouldn't be so complicated. What makes them unique is they actually hang in the window. I've got one right behind me, so you can harvest energy really anywhere. My background is in industrial design, so I'm a bit of a artist, designer, kind of an engineer, also a manager. So lots of lots of intersections.
Hi everyone, I'm Nadav Asor. I'm an artist and filmmaker and educator. On the education side of things, I work at Connecticut College and I run the expanded media area in the studio art department, where we teach a range of things from sound and video to interactive media. And I've also recently started directing the Center for Arts and Technology there, that I'll probably talk about more later. On the art side of things, I work with various forms of nonfiction media, currently as a fellow at the Open Documentary Lab at MIT. And what I do there is what I've done really for a while, which is try to um, create these intimate and visceral experiences for people, through technology, but also kind of reflecting on the role that technology has in those experiences, and often appropriating technologies that were developed for military uses or other such things.
I've definitely had a kind of winding journey. I'll start, this sounds like I'm starting too far back, but it'll make sense. In high school, I was really into art and I actually wanted to be a painter, but that wasn't like a career option for me in my household to be a painter. And I also was really good at science, but I didn't imagine myself like working in a lab or being a painter. And it wasn't until I started applying for colleges that I even knew design was an option. And that's really when things started to fall into place because I've always felt in between multiple roles, like being interested in science, being interested in art, and then I found design. My first role out of college, so I studied industrial design, was actually as a toy designer. And that was really formative for me too. I started off as an intern at an electronic toy company called Little Bits here in New York that makes educational STEM toys. And I really dove in. I was there for almost 7 years. And by the time I left, I was the head of product design. And it wasn't until I kind of went through that toy design journey that I realized that I really loved electronics. And I've sort of been piecing together this intersection of working within design, education, and technology that really excites me. And that was a big inspiration for starting Group Hug Solar. I realized that I could use sort of my toy design skills to make solar energy really exciting and educational, but also use design to make it fun and beautiful. Being a small business owner is definitely very different than being like an independent or working as a designer at a company. And I think that's definitely been an adjustment for me. But I do think the one thing that remains is that anytime there's a problem to be solved, whether it's a design problem, a customer problem, a logistics problem, there's always a way to be creative about it. And that's something that I think really changes the way I think about business. There's so many ways to be creative in areas you don't realize. And I think having the background of a designer where I really studied how to like pull out creativity has helped me a lot, a lot. Super, super grateful because there's a lot of areas where you might think something's not possible, but if you can think about it creatively, there's always some option.
I'm originally from Israel. That's where I grew up, and that's where I went to art school too. But to kind of do it in the style that Crystal did, I like the idea of going figuring out how I got here kind of from the start. And I was always doing a lot of different things, kind of even as a kid. And I was also kind of, privileged to be able to do that, and to just kind of be able to dabble in this and dabble in that. Um, and I, when I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, I was trying to find this something that would meld those things. And I remember back in high school, already running across this magazine. It was, I think, one of the first copies of Wired magazine. It was the early 90s. And they had this ridiculous picture of a guy with like all these cables out of his face, and I don't know, was doing stuff, and there were projections, and there was music. Apparently, I was just reading the description. Um, and turned out later I realized what it was an image of Jaron Lanier, who's kind of the pioneer of of at least the more recent iteration of virtual reality. Not the most recent, but the one from the 80s and 90s. And he was doing this weird performance demo thing, that something that would never happen today. Like it was like very kind of like merging really the kind of hippie spiritual electronic kind of art scenes with trying to create a business pitch. I don't know exactly what he was doing there, but I was like, wow, you could combine technology and art and music and live performances. They're all things that I was really interested in. And somehow make a living out of that. At that point, I wasn't even thinking about teaching, but I just kind of, it latched in my head that I was really into doing something like that. So when I went to art school and discovered that there wasn't really a digital media department, I kind of like created my own weird hybrid of stuff, and kind of continued doing that since. But it's really all been, and still is, very much kind of grounded in this body-based kind of performance-based approach, and very experimental, and kind of trying out both ideas and tools and diving into different areas. So that's kind of the my weird kind of way of coming at this practice that I do, which really kind of each project that I do kind of dives into a different skill set, or and also different kind of. I always don't know what I'm doing. Basically, that's kind of my permanent state of being.
I love that Nadav brought up Wired magazine because that definitely struck a chord for me. I remember reading Wired too, like when I was in high school, and actually Popular Science was another one. I don't know if that was the same for you. Like I remember Pop Sci being huge. Like you could see all of the inventions in there. The interdisciplinary, it's funny because sometimes I feel like it's so baked into my DNA now that it's hard for me to actually think about the moments when it really, really solidified. What's actually kind of funny is that I feel like I spent most of my childhood and like teenage years kind of resisting engineering. My dad is an electrical engineer, and I just like didn't want to do what my parents did just out of pure rebellion, I feel like. But then it wasn't until college that I like made something out of electronics. And I was like, I really like this. And I was like, oh, damn it. Like I really like this type of work. And I actually think for me, the moment that I like consciously realized was in college, one of our projects was to design a lamp, and it's actually a like very standard design brief that like a lot of designers go through. And I really hated that brief because you know, I feel like most of my classmates ended up making these like luxury lamps out of like teak that like were $500. And, you know, it's like if you give a designer an open-ended brief, you end up making something like very luxurious and like a little ridiculous. And I was like why are we designing lamps? Like this doesn't make any sense. Like do we need more lamps? Like why are we doing this? So I actually ended up this was like one of my first projects in energy. I ended up like researching how you could power like lighting through like bacteria. It's like an algae, kind of like an algae thing. And I ended up like soldering this like very poorly working contraption together to present. And it was so challenging and so much fun to figure out that I think I realized like, oh, like I really like messing around with technology, even if I don't really know what I'm doing, kind of like what Nadav was saying. And I think for me, kind of for better or for worse, I love a challenge. And I was like, oh, this is really challenging and interesting. And like, it's exciting and I don't really know what I'm doing. And I like being in that confusing space. Sometimes, most of the time. Sometimes I really regret being in this space. Most of the time, I find it really exciting.
So it's interesting about the whole kind of concept of interdisciplinary practice is not, I mean, I never set out to say, oh, I'm going to make interdisciplinary art or something like that. It's more like, even when I was looking for what to study, I was trying my hand at a bunch of different, kind of creative things. And I was like, oh, if I go to study art, I can do all of them. It's kind of like a cheat. So that was the first, step in that direction, and then getting into more like new media art or whatever you call it these days, right? Expanded media art. I realized, I mean, obviously, I can't do all the things, and also, there are often productions where you have multiple people engaging with multiple parts. So, that was an initial step into collaborations, right? So I had to work with dancers and musicians and engineers and things like that. But then I think later on it became more kind of through the, again, kind of different subject matter and different forms and formats that I was exploring, that I often kind of stumbled into different areas without intending to. So kind of relating to what Crystal was talking about, her not wanting to be an engineer, but stumbling into it. So my family are pretty much all psychologists of different, different backgrounds, different, some research, some are clinical, but big psychology family. And I was thinking that I had nothing to do with that, right? I was making videos and performances or whatever. But one of my early installations, one of my parents' friends came into the gallery and spent a very long time in there, and it was, it had, part of the installation was kind of like a semicircle of chairs and a semicircle of monitors, and people were telling stories in it. And he was like, "Wow, you really managed to capture what a support group feels like." He was like telling me. So I was like, "Oh, okay." And it turned out that a lot of my projects in a way have that kind of thread going through them. So it's kind of like, so I started actually reading a bit more about this, and talking with people that work in these different areas, or even interviewing psychologists for another installation. Again, it was accidental. It just happened to be in a house that psychologists worked in. But so that's an example, right? So but that's different projects kind of just sucked me into that.
I think in terms of like how to stay motivated and doing stuff, I'm a big fan of like making, well, it's risky, but making public milestones. And then I like have to do it. So like I remember I used to do some organizing for New York Design Week, where we would put on gallery shows about design and technology and social impact. And I would just like say, I remember the first year I did it, I was like, I'm doing this, like, and like sign up to be in it. And like it didn't exist. But then I was like, okay, people signed up, now I have to do this. And I sort of need that. I need that like pressure and drive to keep going. And I think obviously with group hug, like now we have customers who like email me and ask me questions, and it's like it gives you momentum to hold yourself accountable. I actually think one of the biggest things I've learned with starting my own company is that there's this like feeling the first few months or even a year. I even feel it now, it's been like a year and a half, where like, no one knows that it's just you doing stuff at home, right? No one knows that it's just you like on your computer. And I think it's pretty amazing if you get to a point where like other people acknowledge what you're doing, and it becomes more real. And I think the more quote unquote real it feels, the more accountable I feel to it. I think like the line between something being a real goal and not being a goal is so blurry that I think for me, like just sharing it with people and making other people know about it like makes it feel more real to me.
The biggest thing is like external constraints. I mean, for at least for me as well. I mean, I guess some people maybe have amazing, just like self, you know, perpetuating kind of drive that, but I really need, yeah, I need kind of even if they're completely artificially manufactured, right? So one of the things I like to do if I'm interested in developing something is latch onto anything. It could be like the most ridiculous small whatever opportunity or event to just test things out, right? To just kind of try it out. So kind of like the public testing, right, that Crystal was talking about. What I've been trying to do more and more is move things back and forth between the kind of educational realm and what I'm working on with my students and problems that I'm presenting them with, so that they actually are kind of totally in conversation or even overlapping with problems and ideas that I'm working on for my own practice, right? So really have used both of these spaces to create kind of tangible deadlines and constraints and kind of I don't want to say products, but kind of development, research and development, and that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, in teaching, it's way easier in the sense that like you're telling students, oh, this is your project and it's due on this date, right? But even there, the way I and it's hard for some of them. Some of them do take to it naturally. Others, it's like a bit harder. But I never just assign a project and leave them to it. It's really all about very clear kind of check-in milestones where we have each time a chance to kind of steer things, like open things up a bit, or go experiment more with this part, or that sort of thing, and a lot of discussion. So, and I try to do that with my projects, which that's where I've really learned a lot from education, because um, we are all, especially these days, kind of shut off in our own studios or apartments or whatever, and finding people to kind of talk about stuff that's super raw and super in progress is really important. Um, that's another form of making yourself accountable.
I think leadership for me, I definitely reflect on managers or leaders that I've like reported to in the past and like cherry pick things that I really appreciated and admired about them, but then also like consciously try not to do things that they might have done or reacted in a situation with me that I really didn't appreciate. I actually think sometimes we think about good leaders as being like quick decision makers and like, driving the train forward. And I think when I think about any situation where I felt, uncomfortable or like something was happening that was unfair or I didn't like it, it always boiled down to communication. And I think that's really the biggest takeaway that I have that I try to do today. Being the head of a small business, there pretty much every day there's some sticky situation that we're in, whether it's cash flow, customer service, logistics, shipping. There's always something that needs to be decided. And I think it's really just about like whatever decision you make, just communicating why you did it. And then if you get new information, like make a better decision. And I feel like that's all you can really ask for. Just be really transparent and respectful. And yeah.
It really has transformed over time for me, I think, and well, and I guess I could say that that's also a feature, I think, that need something that needs to be a feature of, I think, kind of being in any kind of leadership position, which I include teaching in that. Um, is that you're able to kind of self-reflect and kind of change. So definitely as a young teacher, I kind of very directly drew on my kind of the way I approach things in my art practice. And like I said before, that has to do often with diving into unknown situations and creating really elaborate, weird experimental setups. And that often don't work too, right? That's part of it. And that's fine in my own art practice. It's not sometimes as cool if you're like managing the experience of a group of people that actually, are there to like do a particular thing, um, so I had to kind of learn to check that kind of instinct, and to recognize that I will always have it. I recognized that I had that certain instincts that might derail maybe certain teaching situations, and it took me much longer to understand or acknowledge that it's not really ever going to go away. So there is that kind of aspect of kind of both self-awareness and self-acceptance, I think, like go together. So it's not just like saying, oh, I have this bad tendency, but like it's also useful sometimes, right? So just knowing where to harness it. And the other part is definitely learning more and more to recognize how different everyone's experience is that they're coming with, right? To whether it's a classroom or anything else, right? And that has to do with listening too. So creating space, right? And then listening to the people that are there, and not saying everything that I immediately instinctively want to say, or you know, kind of not necessarily going with plan A always, but rather formulating maybe plan A out of kind of whatever emerges out of the group over time. So I like to do that in my classes too. So I like to keep certain elements open ended. Students often really complain in the beginning that all the projects are really open ended. Uh, but then they learn that the missing pieces come up when we actually discuss them, and they come from everyone. So that's another aspect.
I think my goal was always to try to like corral this group of people around a goal and have them iterate and design it and then test it and make sure that it worked. And it was never like I feel like it's never really the job of the manager to come in and like draw the perfect solution and be like, make this, because that's like a really awful way to build a community and sort of a culture around co-creation. I think it's really more about kind of aligning on goals and then iterating of how you get there and having people contribute to that. There were many times where different designers butt heads, designers and engineers butt heads, finance and design butts heads, like that always happens. And I think it's like it really is an amazing process if you can manage to like point people in a direction, corral them to like finish on budget and on time and like execute a thing, but then also have a good time while you're doing it, I think is like so incredibly challenging. And that's kind of how I view the leadership of co-creation, like not being the one executing, but creating that structure where people can successfully create together. It's been an interesting shift for me because from leaving that position to starting Group Hug, I don't co-create as nearly as much as I used to. And it definitely took some getting used to because I was like the person who was on the line. Like now it's like me directing and executing, which is like a really funny it definitely took me a while to get used to because there was like no one else to help me brainstorm. But I would say moving forward, one thing that we're starting to build in is actually co-creation with some customers, which is really exciting for me, where we have some early customers who are like very excited about what we're building and are willing to like get on calls with us and like talk to us about what kinds of things they would want to see and test it. So I'm excited. I'm excited about that. And I think really co-creation is, you know, letting go of your ego, number one, and letting the solution kind of like the best, like let the best solution or the best experience speak. And that can come from anyone. It can come from a group of people, but you just have to, you know, not hold on to your specific idea that you think is the best idea, which is really hard when you're a creative person because obviously everyone thinks that their idea is genius, and it takes, yeah, you have to be pretty egoless and humble to let someone else like change your idea. From the beginning of Group Hug, when I came up with the idea of making solar like really beautiful and more accessible, my main like end goal, kind of speaking to what I said earlier, was to give someone a first step into solar energy. So like me iterating on that, like I came up with this and I did some testing early on, but now it's out there in the world, and I basically get feedback like every single day, multiple times a day, either through social media, through email, through someone in person, through text. Like it's actually like there's so many platforms for customers to give you feedback, which I think is amazing. And what's exciting is that like I feel like I kind of painted this vision and this picture for what I think solar could mean for people individually, like democratizing that type of power. But like I don't have all the solutions, right? And I think it's really important to recognize that I kind of have the knowledge of the technology, of what it can do, of what design can do, but now I really need to talk to people to figure out like what do they want. Because if I like spent a year making like a solar beach umbrella, which actually exists, and then nobody bought it, then like am I really fulfilling the mission that I said if it's not connecting with people? as their first step, then like no. So I think like talking to customers as early as possible is like the easiest way to know if you're going to be successful or not. And I think like it's somewhat controversial among product people, like how much do you listen to customers? Like sometimes people don't know what they don't know about, you know, they don't know what they want, or like they, if it's such a new technology. And I think for me, the way that I think about it is you as an artist or designer might have a vision for something, and then a customer might have an understanding or a problem they're trying to solve. And like what I'm trying to do is kind of like bridge that gap for them. So I think, you know, probably will never make something like exactly what a customer wants unless it aligns with our vision, obviously. But at the same time, I don't want to spend, you know, $100,000 on R&D in 2 years on something that perfectly matches my vision, but like no one understands because that would not be a good way to run a business. So I think I'm always like trying to bridge people. And then my goal would be that like, you know, we get enough people on this train, on this solar train, that we can like keep pushing it further and further. But it's definitely a delicate balance.
I really I like kind of unknown but constrained situations, right? That's like generates, I think, like creative constraints are great. So using kind of like divert, not immediately stopping the kind of request to change something, but kind of diverting it into something that could be generative, I think, is really kind of key. I'm actually very much looking forward to learn about this from Crystal because I'm not very good at that. But definitely, that's definitely a work in progress. Let's put it this way. It's very easy for me to get sucked into these new challenges and kind of like devote an unnecessary amount of time to them. So that's one of my personal kind of pitfalls. But I have learned over time to just like be very explicit, like in, you know, and even have ready. So right by now I have like all this whole folder on Google Docs with subfolders that all have these tech briefs for different projects, right? And that's really important because like, and to have those briefs articulate kind of what I can provide and what I can't and what's kind of negotiable or something like that, right? Because then it's very clear what the parameters are, right? It's like it's just clarity, I think, is the main thing, rather than kind of like leaving things vague. And I'm not the most confrontational person either, so it's like that makes it a bit harder too, because and that necessitates being more explicit in writing or things like that, right? So that's because otherwise, you know, it's very easy, and I've done that a lot as a younger artist, where people ask you to do something and you just say yes, and there's no discussion, because especially with technology, people just assume that things happen by magic, and you know, don't really understand the amount of hard work that goes behind them. So I just learned that, yeah, clarity and being extremely explicit, and to the point where it feels uncomfortable often in the beginning, but yeah, but people are actually grateful for that too. I've found, you know, because they know what they're getting into.
So I'm admittedly, I feel like just in the past probably 4 years, I got better at this. I think it's like two things. One, I definitely echo what Nadav just said, like be transparent in the beginning. And I think that's where it does feel kind of awkward, because I think some people just don't realize what they're asking for. Like sometimes it comes from a good place. I think sometimes people are trying to probably squeeze a little creativity out of you for free. Um, but I do think like being really explicit. So in like my current business, like we'll sometimes get requests for custom shaped solar panels, which is really exciting. And some people will ask if it costs the same price as our mass produced product, which it doesn't, because we would have to make it by hand, you know, it's like a totally different thing. And I found that, like, you know, rather than string them along and see if they're going to buy it, just say up front, like, hey, this is what this costs. And like, if they're interested, then they're interested. And if they're not, then they're not. And obviously, I think it does depend on your situation. Like, you have to decide what price, or like, you know, if it's your hourly wage, like what you feel comfortable with. But I think one, yeah, that clear communication. And I think honestly, I've only been doing customer service for like a few months, and it's been the most humbling experience to talk to customers directly, because you really have to be a very clear, transparent communicator. And I found that, at least in my particular situation, if you're just like upfront with someone to say like, hey, this is what happened, like, here are next steps, they generally appreciate you just telling them what the situation is. And people have that emotional intelligence most of the time to know, like, if you are uncomfortable or if they're uncomfortable. Like, it'd be curious to see what happens now with business deals over Zoom, because usually you can kind of feel a friction if it's not a good fit. So I think be really transparent. I also think, like, have the confidence that another opportunity will come. And if you keep putting yourself out there and you keep, being smart about your choices, that, if this particular thing wasn't a fit, another person or another situation will be a fit and will value what you're bringing to the table and have that.
I think there is something tricky about working with technology creatively, because there is this illusion that you click a button and something is created, and or you have a concept and look, do a couple of quick things and poof, and I think my go-to place that has always been for kind of like learning how much time anything takes is like, any any practice that involves the body, basically, right? So it could be like, hiking, you want to climb a mountain to see a beautiful view. I'm sorry if it sounds like cheesy or something, but it's real. That's where some of my experience comes from. And it's, it takes time, right? It takes time to make that climb. And, and things get gradually more and more, you get different interesting things on the way, and you have this beautiful payoff at the end. But the whole thing is a really kind of strenuous process, and that's true for a lot of other things. Just because our bodies are like this constraint, right? It's like what I talked about before. And it could be any other thing, it could be meditation, but that kind of applying that sort of understanding to working creatively with technology, I think is really key. That the fact that you have to kind of like iterate multiple times and experiment with a whole bunch of things that fail, and like take notes and talk with people and then try again, and try in different times of day. I don't know. It's like, but it's a very, very iterative kind of process that involves a lot of just kind of plugging away at it. Um, and then also, I think there is a form of like meta experience that is kind of repeatedly diving into unknown situations. You kind of learn the pattern a little bit, and you kind of learn um, what to do, and it's especially important to still bring with you some actual skills, right? So it's this combination, right, of having experience of diving into repeatedly unknown situations, but also being skilled.
It's funny because we're talking about thriving in the unknown, and I think for at least for the past 2 years ish of starting group hug, I always feel like I'm in the unknown. There's not really another option for me right now, so I just have to figure it out. But I think it is kind of a mix of confidence and creativity, actually. The confidence that you are going to make it work. And I think having that confidence definitely takes some practice and experience, that you've been in a situation and you've figured out a way to solve it or deliver and execute. And I also think it comes from this idea that creativity is kind of infinite. And even if you have a bad idea or a bad experience or a bad prototype, there's always another idea coming. And I think that's definitely something that I think about a lot. I think before starting this company, I was kind of like afraid, I guess, that like, oh, what if this is the only good idea I have and I really need to like milk this idea? And then I think honestly, through talking to customers and through just like figuring out how to build this business, you realize that, you don't really need one good idea. It's really about iterating and having the skills to keep going. So I think that like perseverance is actually something we didn't talk too much about, but just the idea and confidence that like no matter what happens, you're going to keep going, and maybe it will be an ideal outcome and maybe it'll be like a kind of medium outcome, but either way you're going to figure it out. I think that's really something that I wake up every day being like, whatever fire comes today, somehow I'm going to figure it out. And like, I feel really confident that somehow I'll find a solution, and that keeps me going.